Alright, it tells this problem number 2 tells us to consider the graphs of the quadratic function. So here is g of x, I'm going to highlight it in green, and a cubic function, okay? So they're telling us that the cubic function is f of x. Now if you see this, this is actually on the graph itself. Okay, pay attention, then it says g of x was green, and h of x, which we don't have. So I'm going to use a different color so you can kind of visually see that, and it's not on the graph. Determine the degree of h of x. Explain your reasoning. So I want to figure out the pink. Well, cubic is to what power class? And the green one is what? To the second power. That means that the pink one has to be to the first power. Right? X squared times x to the first, same base, add the exponents. A linear times a quadratic equals a cubic. H of x must be a linear because cubic is equal to a quadratic times a linear. Notice in this problem it doesn't say the word set. Question B, determine the x-intercepts of h of x. Well, if you think about it, for the orange, just make a table over here. The x values for the orange, my x-intercepts are x equals -1 and at 2. The multiplicity here at -1, is it a shoot-through or a kiss? So that means that if it's a shoot-through, that means it has a multiplicity of 1. We already know that because that's the linear part here. And over here, it's a even multiplicity. And we already see that with that 2 up here. So the green is kind of on this one. That's a kiss. Therefore, we don't see it on here, but h of x has an x-intercept at -1. H of x has an x-intercept at x equals -1. So all we know about the pink, let's visually put it on our graph so you can see it. All I know is that it's linear, and I know that it goes through -1. That's it. That's all we know. And based on the math that we know so far, we're just gonna. It doesn't tell us to even draw a graph, but it just kind of gives us an idea what it could look like. Alright, C. Determine the y-intercept of h of x. Explain your reasoning. Okay. So, if you think about the quadratic, you have x minus 2 times x minus 2, right? The multiplicity says you have 2 of these. And we're trying to figure out, well, that's the green. What does the binomial look like for the pink? And the answer is, this is a -4 on the cubic. Like, that's what our answer has to be, right? And this says a negative times a negative is what? Positive. Let me see if I can show you in purple. And we're trying to get a negative. So this has to be a -1. H of x has a y-intercept of -1 because -2 times -2 times -1 equals a -4. So again, how do you get the y-intercepts? If you actually just multiplied all of this out, you can get it in standard form, and it's basically the last term. And I was hoping to avoid it, but determine the equation of the function h of x. So h of x, if I know that it has a y-intercept at -1, let me create a mx plus b slope-intercept form. My y-intercept is -1. And if you look at our graph, we weren't super accurate, but if it has a y-intercept of -1 and it crosses the x-axis at -1, class, this line right here, is this positive or negative slope going from left to right? It's negative slope. Down 1, right 1. -1 over +1, which would be -1. So our equation would be negative x minus 1. If you can get this equation, you'll probably get extra credit on your quiz that you're about to take. So based on the facts of the problem, we have a given quadratic. They've given us a cubic in orange. And we figured out that if a quadratic times a linear equals the cubic, then I can look at the properties of the cubic. We know that we deduced that because this is quadratic, then h of x must be a linear. We know that the x-intercept is -1 because our graph goes through -1 by using this chart. How did we figure out the y-intercept? Well, if I made two of these by multiplicity, -2 times -2 times this equals the graph's y-intercept of -4. And then the last one, we wrote an equation based on the previous two problems. If I have a graph at -1 y-intercept and an x-intercept and the line goes through there, that means the y-intercept is -1 and your slope is down 1, right 1, which is a -1 slope.